Hey guys, Dustin here. Just wanted to show you my first Raspberry Pi experience. I got a little jealous, everybody with the Nintendo Classics, and Nintendo Switch is really hard to get right now still. And I want to play some retro games. This is what I ended up building. I started with the Cana Quick Start kit from Amazon. It included the Quick Start guide here with some nice tips on how to get started, how to install some things. That was kind of handy to have. It came with the Raspberry Pi itself. Sorry about that. Raspberry Pi itself came with the aluminum heat sinks. You can see in there. And it also came with a 2.5 amp power supply. Then I also bought this Anodase case from Adafruit, as well as this metal push button. And I used ETA Prime on YouTube. His channel is a great resource for retro gaming and Raspberry Pi information. Pretty much followed his steps exclusively to get this up and running. So we have a Raspberry Pi 3, a 2.5 amp power supply. This Anodase case, as you can see, it's all aluminum, anodized silver, matches the Mac aesthetic if you're into that. It can be mounted on the wall, 2 screw holes hanging on the wall, ventilated on the bottom, feet to keep it up off, keep some airflow under there. Typical Raspberry Pi setup: audio jack, HDMI, USB for power, micro SD. It has a this crystal glass top, Allen keys to hold it in place. The standoffs for the board were already installed in the case when I got it. The wires for this switch I also got off Amazon, but they're an Adafruit product. They were out of stock when I looked. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of that. The Anodase case came with this power cable, USB power cable, with an inline switch. You can see here for power, which is really handy. Except you got to supply your own wall wart for it. So that's kind of the only downfall there. The power supply that came with the Cana kit is just straight plug into the wall, and the other end plugs in USB to the Raspberry Pi. Modified this a little bit. Like I say, ETA Prime followed his steps there for having a push button on-off switch. So you can leave this plugged in, push the button, turn it on, push the button, and it runs a shutdown sequence. You don't have to click start, quit, shut down. You don't have to do any of that. You push that and it runs a script to shut down the Raspberry Pi. That's kind of nice. This button ended up being, when I got it from Adafruit, a little bit bigger than I thought it was, and getting it in the case was a little trickier than I expected. I was hoping to have room on the back side here to be able to put the button over here, but unfortunately with the standoffs in the case, the board sits a little higher than I expected. Like I say, this is my first Raspberry Pi, my first case for it, my first foray into Raspbian, Retropie, stuff like that. So, in order to get my button in there, I removed the Ethernet port. I took it right off the board, desoldered it, and then I've just put a piece of electrical tape underneath the button there, just for some separation, just in case. Wraps around in there. The button, I had to take the port and make it a little bit bigger and round, obviously, for this push button. You can see it doesn't quite cover the old Ethernet square port, but it's barely noticeable. Yeah, so the wires, one wire actually connects the GPIO pins for the shutdown sequence. I believe this one here is ground. And then I had issues following ETA primes, the LED light in the button. I would like it to light up with the button only when the Raspberry Pi is turned on, but whenever I had it wired the way ETA Prime had in his video, it would cause my Raspberry Pi to crash, it wouldn't boot, and as soon as I disconnected that, it would run fine. I just moved it to the 5 volt power, so anytime the Raspberry Pi is plugged in, the LED on this button lights up. It's fine, it's not what I wanted, but like I say, maybe we'll mess with it later. The heat sinks in there, they're the typical Chinesium heat sinks. I removed the thermal tape and cleaned them off with some rubbing alcohol, and I used Arctic MX4 thermal paste just to get some better heat transfer. As you can see, like, they don't move around anything, and besides, this just is set up in my living room, not a big deal. So I got just the knockoff Super Nintendo controllers for that retro experience that I wanted. Cord is not long enough to reach my couch, obviously, and it is a Raspberry Pi 3. It does have built-in Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. That's why I was okay to remove that Ethernet port. I can still connect over SSH to the Raspberry Pi to transfer ROMs and stuff like that, or you could do it USB. The controls got a short cord, so I bought a 15 or 16 foot extension cord, USB extension cord, and it works just fine. I bought 2 of them, 2 controls, works great. So right now my Raspberry Pi is off, and we push the button, and my Raspberry Pi is going to boot. Straight into Retropie. Boots up just like you'd expect. As you can see, it's in Retropie right now. The Raspberry Pi is on. I'm going to push the push button and you'll see it run the shutdown script. Push the button. And my Raspberry Pi shut down. Tell me what you think in the comments below. What you think of my first Raspberry Pi build. It's nothing special. I'm no real experience with coding or anything like that. But I was able to connect over SSH using my iMac to the Raspberry Pi. I can transfer ROMs, update config files, everything like that. Everything that you'd want to do with the Raspberry Pi for retro gaming, I've had no issues with. It's super easy to use and works really well for me. And like I say, I have 2 iMacs, I don't own a Windows PC, and I have no problem connecting. Just studied on YouTube a little bit and it works great for me. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Subscribe, like, give me some pointers. What do you think I should do? How do I fix it? How do I make it better? So far, so good. Thanks, everyone.